Good afternoon, everyone. Because of time, and it's also difficult to speak after such a great motivation from Obama Kambule, I'm just going to say I want to greet everyone, all protocols observed, the CFO Foundation, CIGFARO, IIA, and especially interns. For me, and I think Dr. Mao clearly outlined the issues that we find ourselves in as interns if you're entering into a sphere of government. I studied SCM at UKZN, and my first job was an intern at Provincial Treasury as an SCM intern. And boy, did I get a shock of my life. I had never seen MFMA. I had never seen an SCM policy. All I knew was how to transform raw material to an output. I was prepared to go and work at Unilever, Coca-Cola, SAP, because that's what we are taught as SCM specialists or SCM graduates at UKZ. And I think now, and I think we are covering that space now because I'm seeing there is public management that is introduced. I would have loved to be taught that because my very first meeting was with the head of SCM at Provincial Treasury. And she asked me, what are you going to do in this department? I'm going to allocate you a mentor. And I was like, I'm going to do demand management. What is demand management? In the sphere of government, it's different. Didn't know about a procurement plan. I didn't know nothing about local government or any sphere of government that is. So I am so happy that there's a platform like this one where you guys are introduced to the kind of legislation that you need and the guides that you need to actually prosper in your line of work and how you can actually even excel in the line of work that you do. I don't know if I'm pointing properly. Yeah. Okay, so for anyone like me who has come fresh from let me see. Okay, I don't know. Technology. Sorry, guys. Okay, how do I navigate? Can I just move from here? Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna move around. I'm just gonna stand here. So for anyone who had an experience like myself, who's fresh from school, who didn't do public management, and I know a lot of you, when you have to rotate, one of the departments that every intern, I work for a municipality that is big, and one of the rotation when it's time for SCM, most of our interns go like, can I go to audit instead? Can I go to water instead? No one wants to go to SCM. By the show of hands, can I see who is in SCM as an intern in this room? So I'm speaking to you guys, but also I'm speaking to anyone who's aspiring to go to SCM, because everyone who thinks SCM thinks the bad things happen in the department. You know, people are gonna ask you you even hide when someone asks you, where do you work here? I just say I work at Durban. I don't even indicate that I'm an SCM practitioner, because the first thing they're gonna ask you, you work at eThekwini, which department? You know, or you are like a jack of all trades. You know everything in eThekwini municipality. I'm a compliant SCM practitioner, so don't ask me about tenders. I know nothing about what goes on in there in as far as operations. So I want to talk to someone who wants to go into this department and actually work. And my theme is to try and steer you to becoming an excellent and a professional procurement or SCM practitioner, if that is the space that you're going to go to. And it touches everyone, because if you are in finance and you're doing budgets, if you are in internal audits, you are auditing the very same SCM practitioners that are doing all the wrong things. But how can we stop that train? If for lack of a better word, how do we stop people from thinking that SCM is a problem? And while I was thinking as an intern, when the head of SCM asked me, what am I going to do? I wish someone had told me that there are guidelines, there is legislation that you use to actually navigate yourself throughout a procurement journey or an SCM journey. So I'm just going to explain. Also, there's always this conception of procurement, SCM. What is procurement? What is SCM? Because a lot of people in the finance field don't know that procurement, yes, it's an interchangeable word. Most of the time people will say, I work at procurement, or someone will say, I work at SCM. But what is the difference? So in simpler words, procurement is actually acquiring of goods and services that a company needs, or a municipality, a mayor needs a new car. You're actually going to procure that car. However, supply chain, it's an interconnected process of designing, planning, execution, controlling and monitoring SCM activities, or you can even say procurement activities in delivering goods and services, and with the objective of creating a net value and providing oversight and coordination of information and finances within SCM. So procurement, just go and you buy. Obviously in the private sector, it involves a lot of things. However, supply chain within the local government sphere involves a lot of these connected places that you need to go through. And then SCM in the municipality, as I had indicated earlier, SCM is so easy to work in the supply chain department, because you are always guided by the legislation, the prescripts. And one of my main interns in my office asked me, but where do I find this? Because you always say it's legislated. Where do I find it? Which pieces of legislation talks to supply chain management? And MFMA 1121 indicates that a municipality needs to have an SCM policy that and that is going to utilize its resources, and it must be in a fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective way, and it must comply with the prescribed regulations of SCM. I always say this, that an effective SCM system or procurement system needs skilled, ethical, and I think Dr. already touched on this, that we need ethical SCM practitioners. We need skilled SCM practitioners. We need people that are passionate about working in an environment that is so clouded with, you know, I'm so scared to go there because I'm going to be pinpointed. I can stand proud here today and say that in the 14 years that I've worked, I have only worked with supply chain, nothing else. I've never been at budgets. I've never been an internal auditor. I've never worked anywhere else, but I've only worked with supply chain. And one of the things that have kept me throughout this time is the fact that I don't deter my ethical cap. I don't stop and say, now I know more. So if there's an opportunity for me to learn and expand my skill, I do that. So it's a department that requires you to have those things. So as I have indicated, that the key, and I think Usbu was indicating that you have a budget. A municipality does their wish list. This is what they want. This is what the ward councillor wants in this area. They want a crash, and I think Ungema said that. But how are you gonna acquire that? Because at the end of the day, a structure needs to be there. Money is there, but then how are you gonna go about procuring that? You have to plan for it. There's money for it. How are you gonna do it? Competitive bidding, who are you allocating this work to? So, and whatever strategic objectives that a municipality has, SCM is a key driver to that. Usbu said the budget is the heart. I always say that SCM sometimes is the engine, because you can start a car, but if it doesn't start, it's not going to move. So you can have all the money, it can have petrol in it, but if it doesn't move, your strategic objectives in a municipality would not be sustainable. Again, for me, what helped me in the local sphere and in any other sphere of government was just knowing that there's a legislation, there are guidelines that are going to tell me this you can do, this you cannot do. So I'm just going to touch base on the SCM legislation. There's more than 80 different legal instruments in legislation that governs a public sector SCM. Just to list a few, for anyone who wants to touch this area, you don't have to go through all 80, because some will be for your construction, some will be for roads, PRASA, different pieces of legislation that governs SCM. But the most important ones I have highlighted here. One is the Constitution, Section 217. I think anyone who has been interviewed, interviewers like to ask this question: what does it entail? What does it mean to you? Do you understand it? Where does SCM and procurement come from? The acts, your local MFMA, your triple PFA. A lot is happening here. A lot of judgments that are coming, concords, different cases. If you're an SCM practitioner, these are the things that are going to guide you to making sure that you steer yourself in the right direction. Your Corruption Act, we don't want to hear that, but how are you going to cover yourself in an event where there's hawks, officials knocking in your office and saying you signed a document that you were not supposed to sign? How do you protect? What are the rights that you have as an intern? What are the rights that you have as an individual? And I think a lot of these acts covers you as an SCM practitioner. Regulations, be your MFMA, SCM regulations, and your triple PFA regulations, just to name a few. In SCM or procurement, there are 5 pillars that are mostly important, and these pillars makes an effective government procurement, and it rests upon these principles of behavior. They are best described as pillars because if any one of them is not applied, the procurement system collapses. And the first one is ethics and fair dealings, and this is covered in the preamble in Section 217. I'm not even going to touch on this because we spoke a lot about it yesterday. Value for money. This one is always questioned when auditors come and say, you paid 55 rands for a bottle of water. Can you spend the municipality's budget and waste it in that manner. So we need to make sure that we are in a space where we can say, yes, I can pay so much, but is it really adding value to the municipality? Openness and effective competition, I think it speaks for itself. Accountability and reporting. This is important when it comes to audit times. You have to be accountable for every process that you did in SCM so that it makes it easier for that IDP, for that annual report to be done. Also, equity. Everyone has a fair chance of being in the space of supply chain, and it's not like it's reserved for a particular group. This is reserved for a particular group. So the 5 pillars of SCM or procurement are there to kind of guide you as an SCM practitioner. I always make an example of this, and I'm a passionate mentor. I love mentoring anyone who comes into my units. Every time, managers are asked, we are now employing new interns, and someone has taken a liking to SCM or is interested in it, I always put up my hand because I know what it's like not to have that guidance and you have to just swim yourself. And one of the questions that my team asked me was that, how do I make sure that I don't do the wrong things? In SCM, it's easy. Use your legislation. So I always make an example of this. If you can see, this is a railway line. I always say a procurement process requires you to follow legislation. And if I was a train having to navigate as a steering in that, will I be able to reach my destination? So your legislation are your alignments to say, go in this path. Because if you don't, this is what is going to happen. So that train will never reach its destination because you are not using the right legislation, you are not using the right prescripts. However, if you see this one, I always say these pillars, this railway line is your legislation, is your SCM policy, is everything that is in line, which I indicated in my previous slide. The train would reach its destination. So the community would get service delivery. I think Mr. Abraham will not complain about trucks that have not been procured yet. There are a budget availability for it. It's sitting somewhere because someone didn't do their job as far as making sure that that procurement process happens to the T. So somewhere in there was a breakage in that railway system, which is now the procurement process. But you can get to your destination by following the right processes. So, because of time, I'm not even going to get into, for anyone who has never been to SCM, what does it entail? This diagram speaks of what happens in SCM, what elements of SCM are there. There's demand management. This is where you do your procurement planning, your needs analysis. Acquisition, this is where now you do your procuring based on your procurement plan. Logistics, you invoicing, you are receiving stock, you are paying service providers on time. You are abiding by the law when Usanil is going to come and say, you haven't paid service providers for over 60 days. And the legislation is telling you there's ones that you can pay within 14 days, there's ones that you need to pay within 30 days. So the legislation is always there to guide you. Disposal management, now you have a car that has reached its useful life. Asset management, performance of service providers. I think as SCM practitioners also we need to be very careful of how we take this last part, because often you think, I have bought something, I've delivered 5 trucks. But who has benefited from that procurement process? Has the municipality actually helped uplift a service provider that was maybe fixing or is going to do maintenance? So you have to monitor your contracts and make sure that you use the right databases as well, and being guided by the policies. And the database that we currently now use is the CSD from National Treasury. So I always say it's easy to just say, go to SCM, you'll do well. But how do I go about doing that? And how do I become this resilient, someone who is not untouchable, someone who's going to say, yeah, but you are supposed to do this. And I say, my SCM compliance hat is never off. I'm uncorruptible. I'm actually one of those people that you cannot even say the tender closes at 11, you come at 2 minutes past 11. It starts with something as small as that. You see the supplier there with his eyes and he's saying, but sis, it's 2 minutes. Legislation and SCM policy says 11. So it starts with something as small as that, because once you accept the tender at 2 minutes past, you're going to accept something bigger. Then it's more and more. So how do I become this resilient SCM practitioner? How do I excel in my operation or in my department? This is what worked for me. I don't know if it's going to work in your area of work. So as an SCM practitioner, I always say, even for the people that I mentor in my department, I say, learn something new about your department or your units every day. For example, your SCM and finance processes, a standard operating procedure. How do I go about doing the work? If I can talk to Usanela Emuva, a lot of people that needs to be disciplined right now for committing fraud and committing whatever in the SCM space, you have done wrong, we know you've done wrong. But because we never gave them a standard operating procedure, he would say, I didn't know how to do my job. So I didn't know that it was wrong for me to sign for a manager, whereas I'm an intern. So make a habit of learning your SOPs. Review and learn your internal policies and regulations. And I always say this, people say, it's such a long legislation, everything. And I always give my interns an SCM policy. Ours has 55 sections. And I say, learn one a day. And decide today that, you know what, I want to learn about bid committees. Go and start with the legislation for bid committees. Who is supposed to be in a bid committee? Because when the auditors come, they ask everybody who works at SCM. They won't say, here, because you're a senior manager, you have to answer. If you are part of the process, you have to answer. But if you don't know what is in the SCM policy of your municipality, you won't be able to answer that. So these help. Ungema touched on the annual report. What is the vision of the municipality? Learn a page, not the entire thing. Set up a timeline for you to say, each and every day, I'm going to page that annual report, just 1 page a day. Your latest audit findings. And if you're an SCM practitioner, I don't worry about finance, I don't worry about revenue. I go on the SCM ones where I need to put my focus on. And if you're an SCM practitioner now, you're going to go, what is Auditor General finding in my department? What is going wrong in SCM? Then you can add value there. Your SCM and your finance KPIs. We are often evaluated at the end of the year. What are you evaluated on? What are my key performance areas that I need to do? Even the KPI of your manager, what is he or she supposed to do? Because it helps you in your SCM practitioner journey. The SCM instruction notes and circulars, there's internal ones for big municipalities, A CFO would issue a circular, a head of SCM will issue a circular, and National Treasury. We often don't go and check what is the latest circular or instruction notes at National Treasury, which is our statutory department. I was shocked myself because I often tell this to my interns: go every day, check at National Treasury what is the latest. We have 118 circulars, MFMA circulars. I think when I last checked, I had 92. I saw 92. So I have slacked as well. So I need to go back and read what has happened between 92 to 118. So it helps you. These are small things that would assist you. Record keeping. Make a habit of safeguarding your paperwork. Checklist. Emails. And I think I said this before, to say what helps you when things go wrong, when those police come or hawks come. What saves me is my evidence. To say, who had SCM send me an email on this date. And don't make a habit of corridor agreements, because those ones come back and bite you at the end. So you go and say, yes, Mayor, you said I must do A, B, C, and D. Please, can I get your secretary to send it via email? That way you have, if you are closing bids and there's 18, ask for a copy of that bid closing checklist, so that you have portfolio of evidence should anything happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's small things like that where you actually cover yourself as an SCM practitioner. Manage your time effectively, pace yourself correctly and honestly. You know, I know when you want a job, they'll tell you, are you going to be willing to work extra hours? I think Bob Kambula was even saying now that sometimes bid closing is on a Friday and there's 1,000 bids that closed on that day. And the SCM manager tells you, tomorrow morning, Saturday, I need you there. Are you going to be able to pace yourself enough to manage your work and your time, honestly? I'm almost done. Continue to study. And by that, I mean legislation doesn't change. MFMA is not changing. But the environment that we are in is changing. And we're seeing this with the PPPFA regulations. There's a lot of things and a lot of dialogue that is happening in that space. So make a habit of skilling yourself with that through mentorship. And I think maybe CIGFARO in the next conference or summits, they're going to touch on the do's and don'ts of mentorship. How do you even manage those relationships? I love my interns, and I always create a healthy relationship with them, but I'm not going to send them to fetch my kids. Because interns become that, oh, I see my car is dirty, I give you the key, you go. Your work now is sitting, no one is doing it. So how are you going to manage that relationship even though you are still in a process of being mentored? Go to private institutions. And the one that I found worked for me when we're in hard lockdown was National School of Government. They have quick online courses that you can do and you can upskill yourself in the local sphere. Abide by the laws and guides of SCM, and it really covers you. Exercise sound judgment with exceptional standards and moral and integrity. That has been touched on a lot. Don't be afraid to report fraud and corruption. I know it's hard, but if I'm doing something wrong, I'm going to take you with me. So if you are able to pinpoint that Hlengiwe who is doing this wrong, be brave enough to talk. And I think we need to change this narrative that, oh, nothing in South Africa is done correct. It can. We can be the generation that changes that. That if you think SCM, you're not thinking fraud and corruption, because we are whistleblowing that and we are putting a stop to it. We're tired. Our kids are navigating a world where you know, it's such a thin line between doing something right and actually seeing something that is not right and not reporting it. You are just as guilty as someone who actually did it, if you've seen it and you didn't report it. And the last one, serve your municipality in an honorable way. And for me, I always say, serve your municipality in a godly manner. Because in that way, I can lie to myself, but I can't lie to God. Yeah. But if you're gonna, I can buy your face and tell you, no, I did my checklist right, but your conscience will tell you you didn't do that. So if you are gonna be a person that is driven and want to see service delivery happen, and you want to be the vessel that is used at that time, serve your municipality with honor. Serve it with such integrity that even your bosses will be like, where did this one come from? But you'll be that person that changes the municipality. So this is the end of my, I hope I didn't take too much of your time. Just one last one for me has always been, you know, in the field of a doctor, when they go and they finish their degrees and everything, they take an oath. You go there, a nurse takes an oath to say, I'm going to serve, I'm going to be honorable, I'm going to do that. Think CIGFARO does it, think IIA does it, SCM practitioners, what happens? I'm not going to be accountable because to who? And we need to search ourselves and be the vessel of change that we want to be in the end. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't take your time.